There's a lot going on today, but I want to put things in context for you. Joe Biden at a famous church going off in a insane speech against Trump supporters, the threats against democracy. Liz Cheney saying we will lose our democracy, your right to vote if Donald Trump's elected. The Hitler narrative, which Obama is pushing Biden to use aggressively, and of course Obama is the Marxist behind the scenes, but Biden doesn't need a lot of pushing to do that. He's loathsome to begin with. So I've looked into this from a historical perspective, and I want you to know this isn't new. In fact, it was first tried out in 1964 against Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. There's a great piece about this from 2016 in the City Journal by Harry Stein. There's other great pieces about this in other publications. There's actually a very good piece that was in Politico some years ago by Michael Lind, fairly liberal, but not a crackpot. At one point, as I recall, had been a conservative, but nonetheless, about the use of the word Hitler. And the attack on blue-collar America, inferring that they're brown shirts. Why don't they just listen? Why don't they get with the program? And the efforts by Republican establishment types, those from Republican families like Sununu or Bush or Romney and others, like Chris Christie, how they try to sabotage the leading candidate or candidates for the nomination. This is not new either. The Democrat Party and the media have a long history of labeling people they disagree with as Hitler. I told you, Barry Goldwater. They labeled Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, Senators Cruz and Rubio. All were Hitler. Among others, Hitler. I've written to you, and in my book, American Marxism, about the Frankfurt Group, group of Marxist intellectuals in Germany who sought to overthrow the government there and replace it with a Marxist regime, but they lost out to the fascists and Hitler and the Third Reich. Many of them fled to other parts of Europe, and many of them fled to the United States, including Herbert Marcuse, who we've talked about, only to try and overthrow our own country with the New Left and so forth. As Lynn points out, it was in the 1950s that the Frankfurt School, the Marxist intellectuals who emigrated to America, who tried to use the Nazi characterization to attack those who weren't down for the revolution, and to insinuate that working-class blue-collar Americans, because they wouldn't overthrow their government, that the proletariat, as they called them, would actually defend their own country among the greatest of the patriots of the people, that they were effectively the brown shirts for fascism. You hear Joe Biden talking about MAGA supporters, MAGA supporters. That's his version of attacking blue-collar America. That's his version of attacking suburban America. That's his version of attacking any Trump supporters. Brown shirts is what he wants to say. But brown shirts is what the Frankfurt School Marxists in America did say. And Biden's picked up on it. Despite his support of unions, because they support him, Biden has contempt for blue-collar working-class Americans. Nixon won them. Reagan won them. Trump won them. And that's the truth. Goldwater was painted as a threat, as an extremist. And yet all he was a traditional conservative. They took his words and his phrases out of context, the way they do with Trump. Anything to link him to totalitarianism or Hitler. They sought to dehumanize Goldwater. Exactly what they seek to do with Trump. They're running the 1964 playbook. That's exactly what's taking place. And as the City Journal points out from its piece 7.5, nearly 8 years ago, among those who poured fuel on the fire were those in the Republican establishment, were those who were part of the Republican ruling class, were those who were quote-unquote centrists and moderates in the Republican Party. Sununu types, Romney types, Christie types, with their media support. In fact, it's pointed out that they were incredibly vicious towards Goldwater, planted a lot of the information against Goldwater, did opposition research like never before against Goldwater, and gave their information to a Democrat Party-supporting compliant media. Same thing happens today. The main force behind that was Nelson Rockefeller, joined by the governor of Pennsylvania, Scranton, joined by the governor of Michigan, Romney's father, just as Romney, the son, does the same thing to conservatives across the board, and Donald Trump. They sought to destroy Goldwater from within. It was relentless. That's why you see Chris Christie on Fox and elsewhere. Chris Sununu on Fox and elsewhere. That's why you see the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, the Peggy Noonans and others, supporting the Chris Christies, the Nikki Haleys. The Goldwater wasn't an extremist. He was more libertarian, frankly, than conservative, but he was a libertarian conservative, and he had his views, and they tried to turn him into a fascist. This is the man who desegregated the National Guard of Arizona when it was a territory. This is a man who, when he took over the business, Goldwater's in Arizona, he desegregated the department store. This is a man who helped found the Urban League in Arizona and helped fund it when it was going bankrupt and supported the NAACP when it was under attack in Arizona. But none of it mattered. The media playbook is the same playbook today. The dry one was 1964. But even then, the media were at least concerned about being labeled partisan, concerned about being labeled the propaganda machine of the Democrat Party. They weren't cautious, but they didn't brag about it as they do today, as they hire Democrats to fill major anchor and hosting positions. That's what's going on today. And it's a huge problem for the American people when you have a corrupt media like this. So Joe Biden gets away with the comments that he makes without any scrutiny whatsoever. Any scrutiny about what he's saying, any scrutiny about the past. And the media have an inordinate influence in this country. Interesting, Goldwater's response to all this was to kind of poke them in the nose, the way Trump does. Yes. As the City Journal points out, rather than seeking to explain the nuances of Goldwater's position, the press engaged in calumny by association, continually badgering Goldwater, for instance, to disavow the KKK. Goldwater's long and honorable record on civil rights was ignored. An early member of the NAACP, integrated his family store in the 1930s, well before it was the norm in Phoenix or in most of the North. After the war, he did the same for the Air National Guard in Arizona, which he founded. And on his arrival in the Senate, he desegregated the cafeteria. He had voted for every prior civil rights measure. Had anyone wished to report it, the contrast with Johnson in this regard could not have been more dramatic. As a Texas Senator, LBJ never supported a piece of civil rights legislation, repeatedly voting against banning the poll tax and against making lynching a federal crime. And as recently as 4 years earlier, running simultaneously for vice president and re-election to the Senate, LBJ had opposed civil rights in the Texas contest while supporting them nationally. There you have it. But Goldwater was a polite man, a man of great class. And he told his campaign, we are not going to attack Johnson personally the way they're attacking me. We are going to run a campaign of ideas. And, of course, he doesn't know it, but instinctively Trump knows that you can't lie down for this kind of treatment. You have to fight back if you have any shot at winning. Johnson's record and character invited close inspection, but he didn't get it. For all the attention given to Goldwater's purported recklessness, the man actually wielding power, recklessly as it would turn out, got no such scrutiny. And under his leadership, the nation was so quickly be racked by turmoil that 4 years later it would be his party's convention playing out against a backdrop of warfare in the streets. Sound familiar? Indeed, coverage of Johnson in the fall of 1964 was so uniformly positive. The LBG in media accounts was almost indistinguishable from the man presented by his meticulously stage-managed campaign. A benign father figure, spreading even more great society largesse across the land, even as he faced down his hard-hearted opponent, the would-be destroyer of the world. President urges political vision, ran a typical New York Times headline over a story that began, President Johnson dedicated himself today to the politics of excellence, restraint, and vision. Interesting. And yet, they're doing it today, there's no question. And they're doing it with the help of these Republicans. In Biden, with the help of Obama, is running the 1964 rerun of LBJ against Barry Goldwater. With some exceptions, of course. No comparison is perfect, but it's perfect enough. And this ideological attack was given birth by communists, Marxists, who came to this country in the late 30s and the 40s to escape Hitler, but to promote Marx. And so today everybody's Hitler and nobody's Hitler. I think it was George Orwell who said fascism is referenced so often, and he was an anti-fascist, that we don't even know what it means anymore.